Hi, my name is Jennifer Mettler, and I'm excited to be here at EPEW talking about making the sports education season model work for you. I work in Calabasas, California at Alice C. Stell Middle School. I'm also the 2019 Shape America Middle School Teacher of the Year. If you need to get a hold of me, please use my email or my Twitter handle. Also, if you'd like access to this presentation, you can use this QR code or this link, and that'll give you access to be able to make a copy of this presentation so you can go back later and review anything that you may want to look over. Today's topics, I'm going to talk about what is a sports education season model and why do you want to do it? I'm going to break down the process of creating a sports education season. I'll show you examples of how I do it with my 8th graders in basketball. And I'm also going to go and share with you a lot of the tips and tricks that I've learned by doing this model for over 10 years and how I've modified it and changed it to work for my class and my curriculum. I'm excited to go over all these great things with you. Let's get started. I will be monitoring the YouTube chat section during this pre-recorded presentation. So if you want to chat it up, please do so and I can go and respond. What is a sports season model? Well, there's a couple components that all sports season models have that make it different from just a traditional sport unit that you might have in physical education. Sports seasons involve seasons rather than units. So you want to think of it as like a soccer season or a basketball season, not a soccer or basketball unit. Students are members of a team. And so throughout that entire season, they're going to be part of a team, working together, learning together, and competing together. There is also formal competition, and you'll have a formal competition schedule where teams are competing against other teams in different games that you create. Players have roles. So you might be a coach, you might be official, you might be a scorekeeper, you might be assistant coach. There are different roles that you can go and play. And you also record stats, wins and losses. There's also a culminating event. So at the very end, you want to think of it like this festivity, this culminating event, something big. So if you are having a season, you might have a championship game, award ceremony, and just some festivity, big event to celebrate the end of that season. Sports education is a curriculum and instructional model designed to provide authentic, educationally rich sports experiences for everyone in the context of school physical education. What I love so much about this model is that every aspect of it really works on those 21st century skills of collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. It also is embedded in social emotional learning. Students work on skills, values, and attitudes of good sportsmanship, and they really have to learn to work together as a team and also how to behave as a team member and a person in a sports season. It focuses on standards, and you can create, just like in any unit for the sports season, you can create educationally rich experiences for the students to learn the standards you want. And the other really nice thing is for so often the teachers at the front and the teachers teaching all the students what to do. And this model really has the students start to take that role as a leader and being in charge of their own education. And so it transitions to more of a student guided learning approach. What I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of take you through my 8th grade basketball unit. So here's an example of what I've been doing with my students and modifying over. When I started creating my basketball sports season unit, I really wanted to look at the standards. And I live in California, so I use the California ones, and I'll also show you the national ones too that guided me. But what you can see here are the main standards that I wanted my students working on during this unit. We are going to work on basic offensive and defensive skills, which we've already spent a lot of time prior to this unit working on. I was going to assess the apply locomotor, non-locomotor, manipulative skills to team physical activity with dribbling, passing, and shooting. We talk about rotation principles of why you release the ball the way you do off your hand, of how that spins off the backboard and drives the ball into the basket versus bouncing out. We also, the unique opportunity with the sports season model is the standards for state, and I'll show you national too, have to do with officials and abiding by those rules or being official and accepting the outcome of the games. And although I don't have competition very often and I don't have tournaments any other times of the year, I do think it's important to add that in at least for one component of their school year so that they can actually work on like, how do we handle losing? How do we handle winning? How do we show appreciation? And so this really allows you to have a controlled situation where students can work on these skills in that controlled environment of your class. I also assessed two other standards, and that was identifying the contributions of group members of a group or team and reward members for accomplishing a task or goal, and describe leadership roles and responsibilities in the context of team games and activities. And what you can tell here is that there are three solid social emotional learning standards that are being addressed in this unit. For national standards, there are so many to choose from that relate to the unit that I do in 8th grade. Two that I was assessing directly were lead pass throwing and also dribbling. You'll notice also that there is one on officiating in the national standards, and that applies rules and etiquette by acting as an official for modified physical activities and games. In addition, there are a lot of social emotional standards that can be worked on in a sports season model. And those are highlighted in orange, such as providing encouragement, feedback, having ethical and unethical behavior, and then also demonstrating respect by asking for help. Once I kind of decided what standards I wanted to focus on, I was ready to plan and get my unit started. The first day of the unit, there's a lot of kind of pre-work you need to do. And so I like to discuss the roles of the coach, because the coach is really what makes or breaks the unit, makes or breaks the season, and makes or breaks the teams. And so you need to have clear expectations of, if you are a coach, this is the expectation that you're to lead the practice. You also decide who plays. You can play, you cannot play, but that's your decision. Most importantly, you need to help everyone improve their skill. It's not about how well you can play, it's about how well all the members of your team can play. You also need to be a positive role model, and you need to have leadership skills. You don't have to be the best player on the team to coach, but what you do need to have is some fundamental knowledge of the sport that you're coaching in. And I always remind them, some people don't want to be a coach because they think they can't play. And some of our best coaches don't play. They're on the court helping the students and helping their teammates grow as players versus playing. But that's a choice up to the coach and that situation. I also assign teams. But when I assign teams, I really want to make sure that there is balance of skills, balance of leadership ability, and then on each team, in my mind, I have somebody who is strong in that sport. That way, when the students choose their coach, I don't choose it, they do. When the students choose their coach, I know that there's somebody that has a good foundation of that sport prior to the unit. The students also need to create team names and team cheers on this very first day. Leadership roles are important for students to understand prior to deciding to be a coach. And so in our class, we talk about what these leadership roles and responsibilities are: to manage, provide feedback, have a clear vision or mission, support others, take responsibility, work hard and motivate with high energy, and set high goals. The coaches, prior to their first actual day coaching, they go home and they write about it, and they choose 3 roles that they're really going to focus on, demonstrate, and they're going to write 3 sentences about how they're going to use those leadership skills while they coach. The players at the end of the unit then write about their coach and what leadership roles they saw in them, giving examples too. This is really nice for the coaches to do at the beginning of the unit because it reinforces what they need to focus on as a coach. The fair play agreement or contract is another important thing for all members to do before they have their first practice. And this one I adapted from the sports education season book. It's a great book, which will give you tons of resources, and I'll kind of share that a little bit later. But it just kind of sets the agreement of how fair play works and what they're going to agree to. I really don't have anybody that says that they can't do it and refuse to sign it. But when students are not behaving in a manner that is appropriate, it's good to pull that agreement out and say, hey, like, what here are we struggling with? And they can kind of reflect upon their actions and then kind of be like, oh yeah, I'm arguing with the official, and they can come up with on their own. So it's kind of a good tool to go back to when students are struggling later on, because they're like, oh yeah, that's right, I remember I agreed to this. So I do this fair play agreement on the very first day with all players. When you start planning your unit beyond that first little day of teaching what coaches do and picking teams and doing the contract, you really want to start thinking about what skills you want taught, what tactics you want taught, and a little bit more about what you want to do for different competitions. This is a layout of my 14-day unit that I do with basketball with my eighth graders. So we start with some fundamental skills. We work on different tactics. There's a review day. There is also an officials clinic, and then we move into game plays of 5-on-5. The reason I really like doing basketball is because the teams are so small. I only put 6 players on a team normally. Sometimes they have to play 4 against 4, but they get a real authentic game because a real basketball game is played with 5, versus if you were to do a sport like soccer, obviously you'd have to modify it down to have small-sided games so students can really learn, but you're also modifying the game. Where in basketball, students still feel like they're playing a real game of basketball because they do get to the 5-on-5 games. In the beginning, you can see competitions are 3 versus 3. And I find that makes it a whole lot easier if we have the little competitions, and you create competitions based upon the objective for the day. So if they're working on set and jump shots, then they only get points for set and jump shots, not for layups. If they're working on rebounding, they might get bonus points for rebounding. On the day that they're doing layups, they get bonus points for setting screens. On man to man, I blow freeze whistles, and if they're in man to man, they get bonus points. So you create competitions that give bonus points for whatever focus you're working on. Normally, I like doing 3-on-3 because it just makes it a lot easier on the students. I've tried a 3-on-2 situation, a 3 offense versus 2 defense, and it tends to get too confusing for them. I've also tried offensive trials versus defensive trials. Some years that is really successful and students can understand, for this minute, I'm on defense only. Some years they really struggle with that, and I have to remove it and just say, okay, it's going to be 3-on-3. We aren't going to play offense versus defense for a trial. It's just half court. You're going to have to play that with your group and figure out what they can understand, because the more you do the modification, sometimes the more difficult it gets. And every single practice, you want to vary what they're learning and what they're focusing on. So you really want to make sure that it's simple enough that they can grasp the idea and work on the skills, and not spend the whole entire time figuring out, like, what am I supposed to do, versus practicing applying the skills that they have. At the end of the unit, I do the assessments, and I'll go and share that with you. And I also do the nominations. Nominations are a great way to have students recognize other students' talent and ability and contributions to a team. And it doesn't just have to be about skills. And that's why I really love these nominations so much. It also is not the teacher, it's from the students. And so when students receive an award because their peers feel like they got it, raises it to a whole new level. On the nominations, I always have them nominate for anybody they want. It doesn't have to be from their team. And normally it doesn't turn into a popularity contest. Obviously, you can go and kind of see how it might go in that way, but students really think hard, and they've really invested a lot of time in this unit. And so really the people who deserve it get it. I like the Google form. With the Google form, I can put everybody's name in, and it just tallies the results for me. I used to do it on paper, and then I had to check off each name, and it took forever. So if you can do this in Google Forms, it really saves a lot of time. These again were adapted from the sports education season, but MVP is one award, and then they have to write why that person deserves it. If they don't write why, I don't give them credit for voting. and the Hustle Award. And this recognizes the energy and spirit of a player. Most Improved, Fair Play, Best Official, and the Leadership Award. The Leadership Award often becomes that really, really highly sought after award. And one reason I love this unit so much is I had a student who really struggled. The student was in our emotionally disturbed program and would constantly get in fights at our school and during lunch and also during physical education. And it was always during team sports. It was in situations where he felt a goal was a goal when it wasn't a goal, or it was when he felt some rule was broken or somebody pushed him and he would just go crazy. But he loved basketball and he wanted to be a coach. And I was really concerned about it. And so I pulled him aside and I talked to him about it. And we discussed like what the expectations were for a coach. And also if he struggled as a coach, what he could do. He could take a walk around the courts. And when I saw that, I'd go in and start coaching his team for him. And through this unit, he really started to self-regulate. And when he started to get mad, he realized I have to be a role model and I can't do that. He spent so much time working on other people's skills and ability, which this selflessness I had not seen in him before. He ended up being one of the best coaches I've ever had. And the whole entire class almost unanimously awarded him the Leadership Award. That's one thing so amazing about this unit is it brings out these leadership skills and these qualities in students that you just didn't even know they had because they're so highly motivated to do well and to be successful. And the caring and compassion that he showed towards his players was just amazing. He was the one that always wanted to play and do everything. And yet for most of the games, he was on the court working with his players versus playing the game. And that is one thing I do encourage is for my coaches to take more of what you would call like the Pee-wee style game where the coaches are on the courts and if they see something, they'll stop it and they'll help their players out. And we allow that more fluid approach of those coaches really just being on the court and working with their players even during competition times. I do a formal assessment on my students on dribbling, passing, and shooting in a game. So during those days of full game play, I assess them while they're playing a game and watch them. It is hard to watch everyone, but what I'll end up doing is the students that are more skilled, as soon as I get them graded, I'll kind of pull them off the court and it'll kind of whittle down how many people are on the court at a time. And often I'll put one really good player back in and they'll constantly feed the ball to the less experienced players so that they go and get that opportunity to show me that they can do these different skills. And what I'm just looking at is basic dribbling, passing, and shooting. Are they able to dribble and keep it under control while in a modified game? Can they pass the ball, especially to a moving target? And then when I'm looking at shooting, I'm just looking at technique. I'm not looking at whether they make the basket or not. Just, do they have the basic foundations to go and shoot the ball accurately? Each day, the coach has a packet and a plan. I use Google Classroom, so everything is uploaded electronically, and each of my coaches have an iPad, and so they pull it up. They also have access to the night before. Many coaches like checking out the night before, what they want to do for the next day. Some coaches look at it just at that moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I guide the coaches, but let's just take a moment to look at what a coach's plan has. A coach's plan has pretty much a quote, what they're going to be doing, some basic cues that are just quick and easy. It'll have progression for drills. It won't say what drills to do. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how to get the coaches to get those drills. It has some rules or fouls. And then also it has pictures and details of what each skill or tactic look like. There also is a competition. And so it has a quick breakdown of the competition. And then there's the schedule. Normally for the schedule, the coaches all want to know who they're playing ahead of time, so they normally figure it out the night before. But when we do the coaches meeting, I'll say team one's playing against team three and go over that also with them. So let's look specifically what some of those examples look like. Here's what my coaching plans look like and my contests look like. I did adapt these again from the sports education season. So I took what they had, their same format, a lot of the same wording too, and just kind of created what I wanted to do. The contests, I changed them quite a bit because I found that they were a little too complicated for what I wanted to accomplish in a 14-day unit. But you'll see that this is what a basic coaching plan looks like. It lays out what they're teaching, gives some cues, gives some ideas about the keys to success, has a picture of how to do the signal and what the signal and rule foul actually is. And then the contest is laid out with what the goal is, how they're going to get points, and then what they're going to call, and some just very basics on it. This, of course, you will need to explain this to your coaches, but this is what they have access to help them while they're coaching. There's also pictures in the packets, and this again is directly from the sports education season book. So you could see for layups or give and go, there's pictures, it shows them how to do it, and it gives them a good understanding visually of what they're teaching for that day. When I first started doing this unit, I followed the book pretty closely on what to do. And for me, some things worked and some things didn't. The biggest issue I had was when we had the roles that rotated every single day. So everybody but like the coach would rotate with all these different roles. I always found the same people were officials every time. And you're like, weren't you official yesterday? Weren't you official the day before? And they really didn't want to rotate, and they always had some reason why they had to do that role again. And it ended up causing too many problems of too many just sitting out and not participating in the activities. So what I started to do was to have uneven teams. And that way I have one team as official. And the great thing about that is while the other coaches are running practice, I can pull that entire team aside and talk to them about what the competition looks like, what they're going to be calling. I can review the signals with them. And then the coach is able to go and put the players on the different courts and decide which players go together. And then the coach can then rotate around the different courts, making sure that the officials are doing what they need to do and helping them out. The other thing I stopped doing was, again, with that rotating the scorekeeper, because again, it's always the same person being the scorekeeper. And so what we do is if there's two officials on the court, then one official can keep score. Whatever player's not in at the time, they can go and keep the score. So really, sometimes it's the coach, it's just whoever isn't playing at that time, they can keep the score. And it just makes things a lot easier. The official still calls out the points, but the actual recording of it is normally with just an extra player available. Too many roles just ended up being too many people choosing to do whatever they wanted and keeping it all the time with whatever excuses. So I really started getting it much smaller. We have a coach, assistant coach, an equipment manager, and then an official team. Those are the only roles that I use in my sports education season model today. I also have small-sided teams, and I don't do nearly as much stats. The stats just ended up getting in the way, and we keep score, we keep records of who won or lost, but I normally don't keep track of who got the most points. That's something you definitely can add in if you have larger size teams, but I prefer to have small teams, more people physically on the court than having larger teams with a lot of people keeping stats on the side. But that's a personal decision that you can do on that. And the other thing is, if you can go digital, it is so much easier. I would be photocopying packet after packet after packet, putting the new packet in, taking the old packet out. The wind would blow, the packets and papers would be everywhere, and it was a lot of work. Once I just made it digital and put it in Google Classroom, it just saved so much time and energy and frustration. So if you can go digital and you have iPads or computers that the students can bring out there and only the coach needs it, It has, another nice thing is that since it is digital, the players have access to all the information too, and not just the coaches. So some players like to look over it the night before and see what they're going to be doing the next day and working on. Those are just some tips that I really learned over the years that have made my unit make a lot more sense for my classes and what I want to accomplish. Here's how I organize a typical day. First of all, I become commissioner from that point on, also known as commish. And the kind of cool thing is you really establish this relationship with especially the coaches, where after this unit, some of my coaches only call me commish for the rest of the year. And I love it. It's because it's a bond that we share. But I'm no longer Miss Mettler, the teacher. I am commissioner. And I let the students know that my role is to oversee, it's to help, it's to support, but I'm not teaching this unit. You're learning from your peers and your classmates. The way we normally start the day is I have my coaches go and meet in a little different location. They talk about what's going on. They look over the stuff. And then I have a brief coaches meeting. While I have that coaches meeting, the classes that can handle it, they often have a warm up that the coach has them do independently while I'm running the meeting. The classes that can't, normally they go up to their court. They have the equipment manager has equipment ready to go, and they wait for that coach to come up to give them the first thing to do. So in that coaches meeting, we normally talk about what skills they're working on. Do they know what drills to do? Because if they don't know what drills they can do, I can guide them on it. We go over the official signals, and we also talk about the competition, and it gives an opportunity of, are you struggling in one area? Are you having difficulty with players? And it's just a private place where the coaches can talk, they can teach each other and help each other out, and we can have communication before they head on up to work with their players. Because the last thing they want to do is go up there and not feel confident in what they're doing. And so this way, if they're not comfortable at something, they know they can get private help with me and the other coaches. We give extra help to coaches who do not understand the focus. Tons and tons of extra help. I'm there to help them, and it's fine. And I tell them that that's okay. And so that coaches meeting is why it's so important. The equipment manager, like I said, they go and get the equipment once they're to their courts. The coaches then, once they're done with the meeting, they got the equipment, the players are there, they're going to run their full practice while I circulate around. Then I'll have a coaches meeting after a little bit into that, and then I'll organize a competition. The players mainly need to organize it in the beginning. I take more of a front role on that, and towards the end, I'll just say competition time, and everybody knows what to do. Everybody knows where to go. But in that beginning, you really have to stop and control it. I used to have the officials like time trials, and managing the stopwatches and everything else was too much for them. So really what I'll do is I'll say trial one will start in 30 seconds. And if the players aren't out, then they just miss out on points. And so it kind of encourages them to go a little bit faster. And then I'll say when the trials end. But I found out that having the coaches and the players and everybody trying to time it themselves, it just ended up being the end of the period would be over and no one had even started the second trial. So the competition is super important, and you always want to create learning opportunities in that competition. So when I pick the small-sided games, as I mentioned before, you really want to focus on what are they working on today and create a point system where they'll really be able to go and show and practice that skill in a modified situation. And then at the very end, the officials come in and I talk to them only about the score. I never get score from coaches. I never get score from players. And if the officials give me the wrong score, oh, well, that's just part of it. And if somebody gets upset, we talk about that. Like, this happens sometimes. Officials make bad calls. They make mistakes. How are we going to handle this situation? What are we going to do? And we work on that more in an authentic situation, because sometimes officials don't even know the score. And I'll be like, okay, there's no winner today. And then eventually we can figure it out, but it also puts some of that ownership on those officials. Like, you need to pay attention, you need to keep score, you need to make sure that you know the score. And so that's also done away from everybody else, so that there's no arguing about what the score was. Officials come to me, they report it, right or wrong, that's what it is, because that's like real life. Coaches, like new teachers, often need some tips because they'll really struggle with their players. I give normally hula hoops to each coach, and that way they have something for the coaches to go and have the players keep the equipment without the balls rolling away. Because we know as teachers, if somebody's got a basketball in their hand, they're not going to listen to you. But our coaches don't know that. So you need to tell them, listen, when you're talking, the basketballs go in the hula hoop so that they'll focus on you. And then also you might want to go and say, hey, have your players sit while you talk. Some players can do that, some players can. It kind of depends on the situation. They also need to know, like, if you have one player that's kind of like a know-it-all and wants to do everything, give them a job, have them work with a player who's less skilled. And this works really, really well because you end up having, instead of one teacher in a normal unit helping every single student, you have all these different coaches helping, and then these individual players helping someone else on the team. So there's so much support for all the players in learning the basic skills and getting better. If you are also having persistent problems, like, get me. I'm the commissioner. I'm here to help. Don't just struggle on your own. I'll work with you and I'll give you some suggestions. I'll give you some help and I will intervene when necessary. And then the other thing you get a lot is that know-it-all. Sometimes you can pair them up with another person, but sometimes you need to tell that know-it-all, you know what, we're going to do this drill right now with, these other players. And while working on this drill, I want you to come up with another drill to do afterwards. And as teachers, we know a lot of these different tricks, but our coaches don't. So it's important that you tell these coaches these tips and tricks so that they're successful. I've gone over officiating and scorekeeping a little bit, but just a couple of things to remember is you want to keep it small and simple. I have officials only call the fouls and points, and they only call the fouls that they have learned up until this point in time. So if it's day one and we're doing traveling and somebody doubles dribbles, like, we don't call it. We haven't learned it yet, and we'll work on that as we go. I normally don't do consequences. It's just in the beginning, you call it and then you play on, you stop it and play on. I'll turn it into turnovers later on. I just don't want it to get overwhelming of all the things officials have to do, because some of them are good, some of them are bad. And so if you have somebody calling fouls all the time and someone not calling at all, it ends up being a little difficult. So by not having big consequences, it just encourages those officials to make the call, because if the call is wrong, no one's going to yell at it because we just stopped the play, we called it. And then if it is wrong, often it's a learning opportunity versus a scolding opportunity. I like the squeeze whistles. They drive you crazy. They squeeze them all the time, but they're a great way to have that official make the call. And then my officials also have foul cards, and those foul cards have pictures of the different fouls to help them out. I normally give them a penny. They tie it around their wrist, so that way I can identify who all the officials are. So when I have that official meeting, I call them in, I give them each a penny, and we can clearly identify them. The coaches, as we talked about before, are going to supervise the officials during that competition. And for scorekeeping, I like to use apps. There's a great scorekeeping app for basketball. But if you don't have a app, because we use the iPads in my class, and then we just go over to the basketball scorekeeping one and they just tap it and it keeps score. If not, pencil and paper works just fine to use. This model provides so many opportunities for social emotional learning. I like to do team cheers at the beginning of the competition and also at the end. You would think students would just know how to do this, but often physical education teachers grew up in sports, but many of our students don't play sports. So they don't understand the team cheer or the appreciation at the end. And it's something you need to teach them and they need to practice. They also often don't understand that lineup at the end of shaking hands or elbow bumping. And so it's a great opportunity where at the end of every single competition, you have some way that one team recognizes the other team. T-charts are also a wonderful tool to use. T-charts are where you have C on one side, here on the other, and then a main objective. So it might be showing appreciation, and then you write down all the ways you see appreciation being shown and all the ways you hear appreciation being shown. One thing I do is I have a day where the competition is based upon which team has the most seeing and hearing on their chart. Now, the players don't know this and the coaches don't know this, but at the end of the day, when I take the score, it's not about how many points you got, it's about your see, hear, T chart. You can also use a good sportsmanship meter. So at the end of every class, you show where the class is on that meter, or you have discussions and the class can kind of decide where they fell on that good sportsmanship meter. A daily recognition of fair play is also a wonderful way where you can recognize the team that played fair or the player or whatever social emotional learning objective you're working on. I also like my coaches to congratulate the other coach at the end of the game, whether they won or lost. And a great way that you can have that conversation is for the coaches to use sentence starters so that they know at the end of the game, I'm going to have to say this to the coach and finish the sentence. So a sentence starter might be, I like the way that your team, and at the end of the game, the two coaches meet up, they congratulate each other, and then they do the sentence starter and finish it. Having a good winner and good loser motto is always a really good thing to have. Since this is a competition based situation, this is a place where you really can work on those skills. It's also important that coaches understand at the end of the game, the best coach is not worried about the score. They're worried about the improvement of all their players, not just a few, but every player, and then also the attitudes their player have on and off the court. The example I showed you is for my 8th grade class, but there are modifications that you can do to make it work for earlier grades. I recommend doing 5th grade and up. Couple changes you're going to want to do is you definitely want to keep those teams small and you want those competitions extremely simple. You don't want a lot of different things going on. If you're just working dribbling for speed, then it's up and back competition, and that's it. If you're working on dribbling in and out of the cones, then keep it just simply in and out of the cones. Try not to go and combine too many things at once and have a very clear, simple way to know who won, who lost. I also would recommend this as a follow-up unit. Students should have those basic skills prior to the unit being taught. That doesn't mean they have to have them in fully mature form, that you've worked on them before. That way it's not necessarily all new things that they're learning. It's more of a improvement of what they already know or an application of that skill in a different setting. Or it could be simply just social emotional learning and your whole focus is solely on that social emotional learning aspect. I also would keep the learning objective for each day to 1 skill or tactic and 1 knowledge. Nice, simple. This is the one thing you're working on. This is the one concept you are also learning too. If you see your students daily, such as in 6th grade or 7th grade, you might consider doing the coaching plan twice in a row. So it's not always something totally new each day. They kind of work on it one day and then repeat it the next. Or on day 1, they have the drill. Day 2, they have a competition and a review. You can also set drills that the students already know ahead of time. That way the coaches don't have to come up with something new. You can even, for those younger grades, demonstrate 2 or 3 drills. And then the coach can choose which one they're going to do and then organize it. And then that equipment manager can see this is what equipment I need for the drill we choose. So they have it laid out for them. And I would definitely keep officiating simple. Just win or loss. If you want to do a basic score, and then you, instead of looking at specific rules, specific fouls, I would go and just maybe do a good sportsmanship and looking at the positive side of sportsmanship and not necessarily the negative side, and keeping it real positive and real simple. Here are some great resources that you can use. A lot in this presentation talked about the sports education seasons. That's where I've gotten all my resources from. I really recommend you to take these 2 books. I know they're a little bit older, but they're definitely not dated. Also, I can learn from your thoughts. So please take this evaluation. Let me know what went well, what you needed more of, what I did too much about, and that way I can, in the future, use that information to tailor this presentation to make it more useful to my audience. Again, thank you so much for being here, for listening to this presentation. The QR code is there, the link is there if you want to look over this presentation. Again, my name's Jennifer Mettler, and I hope you learned how to make the sports education season model work for you. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.
Thank you for attending the 48th Annual Elementary Physical Education Workshop. We're glad you were here.
Please follow us on our social media platforms. EPEW can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Please check out our website for links to more great sessions. Just go to epew-cp.weebly.com and click on the virtual EPEW 2021 tab at the top and scroll down.
EPEW 2021 Educators Assemble would not be possible without the support and dedication from the amazing EPEW committee. The committee has been hard at work for months preparing for this workshop. Thank you to Linda McGee, Barbara Groton, Scott Wilson, Stephanie Sandino, Julie Miller, Jessica Monlux, Kayla Ailman, Shelby Lozano, Andrea Chavez, Scott Townsend, and Cindy Chase.
Thank you for attending EPEW, where our motto is, come to learn, leave as family.